The Pantheon in Rome has stood for 19 centuries. Its concrete dome is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome on Earth. No one has ever built a bigger one. And for more than 1,000 years, no one could even build a smaller one. The recipe for the concrete that made it possible was lost, not destroyed, not banned, simply forgotten, one workshop at a time. So how long does it take humanity to forget a technology it once mastered? The honest answer is not centuries. It is closer to 2 generations. The story begins around the 3rd century BC on the coastline of the Bay of Naples, in a small port town called Puteoli, modern-day Pozzolana. Puteoli sat on top of one of the most volcanically active landscapes in the Mediterranean. The soil around it was full of a strange ashy powder that Romans called pulvis puteolanus, Puteoli dust. We call it pozzolana today. And by pure accident of geography, that dust turned out to be the missing ingredient in the recipe that would build an empire. When Roman builders mixed pozzolana with lime and seawater, they discovered something no earlier civilization had ever managed. A mortar that did not merely dry, it reacted. Chemical reactions between the volcanic ash and the calcium hydroxide in the lime produced new mineral crystals that locked the mixture into a stone-like mass, and, remarkably, kept locking it tighter every year. Roman concrete does not weaken with time, it strengthens. The Romans did not fully understand the chemistry. Nobody did until the 20th century. But they understood the result, and they scaled it aggressively. By the 1st century AD, opus caementicium, Roman concrete, was pouring the harbors of Caesarea and Ostia, the aqueducts of Provence, the vaults of the imperial baths, and the walls of buildings from Britain to Syria. The entire structural backbone of the empire, quite literally, ran on a mixture that had been discovered by accident in one Italian bay. The peak came in the year 128 AD, when Emperor Hadrian's builders finished the Pantheon. Its dome is a single continuous pour of concrete, 43.3 meters across, thinning gracefully from 6 meters at the base to 1.2 at the top. Around a hollow oculus at its center, unreinforced concrete carries its own weight across a span that would not be equaled for over 1,000 years. And that dome, built with no rebar, no steel, no modern engineering, is still standing today in daily use with no significant structural repair. The recipe that built the Pantheon was, at the time, the most sophisticated construction technology on Earth. Then Rome began to fall. Rome began the long, slow process of ceasing to be Rome. And here is the crucial insight of this episode. Roman concrete was not lost in a single event. It did not go up in flames when the empire's western half collapsed. It faded out the same way languages fade, 3 generations at a time. The imperial concrete industry was not just a recipe. It was an infrastructure of specialized labor, quarry crews who knew which volcanic strata to dig from, shippers who moved pozzolana in bulk across the Mediterranean, mixing yards where crews learned the right proportions by feel, formwork carpenters who could build the wooden molds for a vault or a dome, and above all, a state that could pay for all of it at scale. Remove any one of these pieces, and the recipe survives only in the memory of the workers. Remove 2, and it starts to disappear when those workers die. Through the 3rd and 4th centuries, the empire's tax base contracted, and its construction budget shrank with it. Cities kept building, but they built smaller. The industrial pozzolana trade began to fragment. When the Western Roman Empire's central authority dissolved in 476, no calamity ended concrete. It simply became uneconomic to organize a Mediterranean supply chain for a recipe most local builders no longer needed. By the 6th and 7th centuries, in most of former imperial territory, the last generation of workers who had actually seen a Roman-scale concrete pour was gone. Their children knew the buildings. Their grandchildren did not know how the buildings had been made. Look closely at post-Roman construction in Italy, Gaul, and Iberia, and a pattern emerges. Builders were still using lime mortar, but the pozzolana was gone from the mix, and the massive continuous pours were replaced by small stones set in weaker binder. It looked similar. It behaved completely differently.
There was no announcement of the loss. No chronicle records, "We have forgotten." That is how technologies die. Quietly, when the people who could do them stop being replaced. For roughly 1,000 years, from about 500 to 1500 AD, no one on Earth built a concrete dome that could rival the Pantheons. That does not mean nothing was built. The medieval world produced its own extraordinary structures: the flying buttresses of Chartres, the stone lattices of Cordoba, the timber halls of Norway, but every one of them relied on cutting stone or arranging small units. The trick of pouring a monolithic dome that had been a specialty of Roman opus caementicium simply had no successor. When Filippo Brunelleschi solved the problem of Florence's cathedral dome in the 1420s, he did it with brick and stone, in a herringbone pattern he seems to have invented himself, and he had to invent the machinery as he went. He was not rediscovering Roman concrete, he was solving the same problem again from scratch. Meanwhile, the buildings the Romans had left behind were staring at everyone. Renaissance architects in the 15th and 16th centuries measured the Pantheon obsessively. They knew concrete existed, they walked on it every day. What they did not have was the recipe, and what they especially did not have was one specific ingredient. Books like the 10-volume treatise of Vitruvius, written around 15 BC, described pozzolana explicitly, calling it a species of sand which, by nature, produces astonishing results. Renaissance scholars could read the description. They could not reliably make the material. There is a haunting fact about this middle period. In the coastal region of Naples, right on top of the original pozzolana deposits, some local Italian builders retained a folk memory of the volcanic ash technique, but only for small marine works, and without the imperial scale, the imperial standards, or the imperial reach. The knowledge did not vanish everywhere. It just retreated to a village craft level, isolated and unimpressive, precisely because there was no longer a state or a market that needed it at industrial scale. Then, slowly, the recovery began. In the 18th century, English engineer John Smeaton, studying limes for the Eddystone Lighthouse, identified why some limes hardened underwater and others did not, the beginning of modern hydraulic cement science. In 1824, Joseph Aspdin patented what he called Portland cement, chemically nothing like Roman concrete, but industrially reproducible, and by the late 19th century powerful enough, in combination with steel rebar, to make modern reinforced concrete possible. But here is the catch that closes the loop. Modern Portland-based concrete is not as durable as Roman concrete. Our concrete has an expected lifespan of 50 to 100 years before cracking, spalling, and corrosion of its internal steel force major repair or demolition. Roman concrete, without steel, is still in daily service after 1,900 years, and marine breakwaters made of it have withstood 2 millennia of saltwater that would eat our concrete alive in decades. The full rediscovery of Roman concrete is very, very recent. Recent enough that most of the surprising papers on it were published while today's college students were in high school. In 2013, a team led by geologist Marie Jackson at the University of California, Berkeley, drilled cores from a Roman marine breakwater at Portus Cassanus. Under the electron microscope, they found something no engineer had expected. The seawater that ought to be eating the concrete had, over centuries, actually driven a slow chemical reaction that grew new interlocking crystals, a mineral called Al-tobermorite, forming from within, healing microcracks as they appeared. Roman marine concrete was not merely surviving in the sea. It was using the sea to strengthen itself. Then, in 2023, a team led by Admir Masic at MIT and researchers at Harvard and Italian universities published a paper that solved a mystery archaeologists had noticed for centuries: small, bright white lumps embedded throughout Roman concrete, previously dismissed as sloppy mixing. Under the electron microscope, those lumps turned out to be lime clasts, and under laboratory conditions, the team showed that when a crack forms and water reaches a lime clast, the water dissolves it, carries the calcium along the crack, and precipitates new calcium carbonate to seal the crack shut. Roman concrete has, in effect, a self-healing mechanism built in.
The Romans almost certainly did not design this deliberately. They mixed their concrete hot with quicklime rather than the slaked lime that modern builders use, because it was faster and worked. The self-healing was a lucky side effect of a practical shortcut, a shortcut we spent 2,000 years scolding them for. Their alleged sloppiness turned out to be the reason their buildings outlasted ours. Which raises a strange and slightly humbling question. In 2013, when we finally understood the crystal chemistry, the material memory of Roman concrete was recovered. But the tacit memory, the mixing yards, the foreman's feel for the right water content, the pozzolana quarry crews, the imperial supply chain, that memory was gone in the 6th century, and it is not coming back. We can now analyze the recipe atom by atom. We still cannot build a pantheon. That is what makes lost technologies uniquely difficult to recover. Two kinds of knowledge coexist inside every craft, and only one of them survives being written down. So, how long does it take humanity to forget a technology it once mastered? 3 honest answers, one for each layer of the loss. The industry itself, the workshops, and the labor, about 2 generations after the last commission, roughly 60 to 100 years. Once the state that pays for a technology stops paying, the workers who know how to do it die without training successors, and it is gone within a lifetime. The full recovery of the material, about 1900 years. From the finishing of the Pantheon in 128 AD to the Berkeley and MIT papers of 2013 and 2023 that finally explained why Roman concrete outperforms modern concrete. And the tacit knowledge, the craft, the feel, the invisible infrastructure around a technology. Never fully. We have the atoms of Roman concrete now, but we do not have the men who could pour a dome across 43 meters of open air with no rebar, and we may never have them again.